course, I suggest we hold off on questions until after the discussion. And I'd like to invite Dr. Prof to comment. Set it up. She did her master's work at Leipzig University and doctorate at the University of Mannheim. Thank you, Raya. She now teaches at Tel Aviv University's Bremen International Master's Program on Migration Studies, which will begin this fall. Is that right, this fall?
God will.
Thank you, first of all, for a very interesting and I think important paper, particularly for these following three reasons. I think it provides, you haven't seen it all, I have to say in advance. The paper is very rich and it shows various analyses that are all, I think, of very important contribution. First of all, this idea that retirement is not the end of it, I think is a very important notice that people actually go back into work and work longer than I would at least expect. I think it is also a very important paper because it deals with reasons and consequences of inequality in old age. And we've already heard this morning about longevity and other demographic changes going on in Israel, but also elsewhere, that actually forces us to move beyond determinants of labor market position and into post-working life if we really want to understand and disentangle these inequality issues. I think a useful analysis that this paper makes is exactly tapping into unemployment as well as reemployment, but also retirement and unretirement and so on and so forth, what we've just seen in front of us here. And finally, it's very important, evidently, in the United States, and I'm wondering whether perhaps also for our case in Israel here, to focus on these cohort effects, particularly as we've seen in light of the important changes in education and its changing rewards, and also considering the changes in eligibility to Social Security benefits that we've just seen in front of us here. I do have, however, some suggestions, and I will start with maybe one of the issues that I was lacking while I was reading the paper the most, which was we've seen a lot of theoretical articulation or a lot of theoretical argumentation, about the causes of the different timing of retirement that we observe in the United States. What was lacking, in my opinion, is a bit more reasoning with regard to this unretirement process. What are the underlying mechanisms that are guiding people back into unretirement after they've already retired? I think it became more interesting for me to understand these mechanisms when I was observing the differences between patterns of unemployment and reemployment, and then again patterns of retirement and unretirement, which were interestingly similar, I found. And for this reason, I'm wondering whether this unretirement process is a different process than the one that is guiding unemployment and reemployment in the labor market, and if not, how is this different? And I think that question is particularly interesting because we might be looking at some dramatic change in the meaning or the function of retirement in the United States, where retirement becomes something that serves the employer more than the people that it's supposed to support, maybe. So this is one of the questions that I would maybe like to look into later on. I was also wondering why subjective job characteristics were not included in the model, as well as home ownership and value of owned asset that you mentioned, I think, correctly in the paper, that they are important ways to accumulate wealth and deal with retirement, but then they were not estimated in the models. I know the models are rich enough and complicated to achieve as they are, but just a question about that. And finally, some attitudinal preferences regarding work, leisure, and family, which maybe can account for the fact that age was insignificant when it came to unretirement predictions. And I think maybe it's not about how old you are, but rather about what you would like to do in your life in different ages, maybe. I would like to see more complete tables when it comes to the interaction effects. I know that they are then later discussed in the graphical way, but one could gain more, and I realize that the paper is very, very long and rich as it is, but just maybe some technical comments. I would also maybe like to hear more about education and whether it was measured as a time constant or time changing covariate, because you also referred to that in the paper, that people in the United States go in and out of education during the life course and so on, and maybe this is also of interest. And finally, a methodological question you can maybe refer to afterwards in the break. What did you do in terms of time-changing covariates? Maybe the final remark that I would like to make is that when you read through all the different tables and analysis, everything is really relevant and interesting. And I think, as I said before, very important. What I would maybe like to look into in more detail is the way that different models that you try to estimate there relate to each other. And I just suggested in my drawing very brief ideas of paths that are interesting, I think, to me, as to how, for example, pension income may explain unretirement patterns of individuals, or maybe unemployment can also tell us something about unretirement, and so on and so forth. Just a couple of more interesting points I thought maybe we could further discuss in the context of this paper, which are, first of all, gender roles and gender inequalities. That I think was a very interesting point we've just seen, also in terms of education of women and so on. And finally, what are the jobs individuals take on after retirement in this unretirement process? This is something I would love to hear some more about. And thanks again for a fascinating paper.
Thank you. Questions?
Ladies, gentlemen. Lynn? No. Yes, Jonas.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry for insisting a bit more on that, but I actually also thought of this question of unretirement as something very interesting, although it's such a huge phenomenon. So just the question, how many people are we talking about? So in this sample, quantify more or less what is the share of retirees that return to work after, and also how did you operationalize actually?
About 25% over the period of observation. With we don't know what can happen later on. About 25%, and we wait 6 months after leaving the labor force, claiming to be retired and receiving a pension. Sort of over-determined what retirement, how it's defined.
This is only for the youngest cohort, or that's...
It's for all of those in that 92 sample for the health and retirement study. Yeah.
A lot of exercise today, huh? Thank you.
I realize that the actual paper, is very rich, and some of the things you went through, I'm not sure I captured, but I was interested in one of the analysis. You spoke about the effect of having a pension plan and the type of pension plan on social mobility. Occupational mobility, I should say, on earnings mobility, upward or downward. And I wonder, in what sense are you using the pension benefits, whether these are simply an indicator of the quality of the worker or in some other way that may affect this mobility?
I think I use the term job quality because it's probably a match between what the job is and what the individual's attributes are. I think that making these offers and providing incentives for workers to take them, whether their pensions or health insurance, are good markers of job quality. That's probably arguable, but I think they are.
Can I follow up? Because it's interesting because the analysis, from what I could see, is carried out, of course, from sort of an individual's perspective, but one can also think about this as some structural factors where jobs themselves, because of whether it's the definitions or sort of occupations as labor markets, have very different rates of providing pensions or health insurance for that matter, irrespective of one's, say, education and other types of things. So I don't know if you looked at the differences that occur due to these sort of structural factors. You mentioned unionization, but that's only one sort of.
The full models have got characteristics of jobs, occupational class, size of firm, all of those are built in there. And that's why I sort of displayed them as controls, but we did control for those things. And the benefits turn out to be much more powerful and robust in predicting these things, capturing what might have, without the presence of a benefit measure, might have been the occupation or the employer's characteristic.
Refining that.
I wasn't sure what was the effect of the uncertainty. Of course, you mentioned that uncertainty grew, but what was the effect of uncertainty on retirement, on unretirement, etc.?
Yeah, and because I thought I maybe had 35 or 40 minutes. I end with that is where I am now, trying to. And one of the questions I would ask this group, and that is, the economists have formal models for us on decision making under various conditions of uncertainty and the tendency towards risk aversion. And we're only beginning to collect data from workers like this in the Health and Retirement Survey and others, trying to ask them questions about this, how much, what kind of future time perspective they have, how much ambiguity comes with it. And I'm starting in that direction by first looking at financial literacy, and then adding to that, pinning to that, knowledge about fundamental things like inflation, compound interest, stock diversification, etc., linking that knowledge to then expectations or concerns about the future. And I'm there now. I'm not finished with that. But I think that my question is, how do we study it? Except if we can try to measure it in real time somehow. We're often really just speculating about it and not measuring it directly. So uncertainty to me is the next big question, which is more than just an experimental, formal activity, but something that's captured in real time.
What do you speculate? Does better financial literacy contribute to greater certainty, or does that greater awareness lead to less certainty?
That sounds like a question you'd ask. I think that to me will add even more complexity to the process. What I do know is that what you would expect, more advantaged workers have higher rates of financial literacy, fall into those gradual retirement trajectory, etc. But the mechanism that links these things, I think, is interesting, but nobody's studying it.
One which is a kind of funny paper that was by Momi Dahan, and he canvassed people from the Treasury about how much do they know about their pension, and in spite of the fact that they said that this pension decision is very important, he came up with something like that 50% did not know what their pension, who their pension fund was, and that leads me to the second thing that I know from talking to people. People start to be interested in their pension about 15 or 10 years before they retire. So they're not interested. It's not a matter of the ability to understand the compound interest, etc., but the fact that they're not interested. It's too far away in some way.
There have been studies in the United States of this, and it was definitely true of defined benefit pensions. If all you needed to know was what you were going to walk away with after service and earnings trajectory, you didn't need to know. But increasingly, the defined contribution pension requires some sense of knowledge about how important time is in the accumulation of these accounts and what the impact of inflation might be on the accounts when you begin to take them out, et cetera. And I do think now, yes, even people with defined contribution plans are not going to start working until they get very close. I'll tell you, I chaired a committee at Duke on retirement, and we interviewed people after age 60. These are university professors, and 70% of them hadn't even thought about their retirements. They just needed to put in so much or moving up the scale in income. So I think you're right. Fundamentally, most people just delay thinking about it.
But this is the last question, please. Last comment, then.
With their pensions. So there are initiatives in many countries, like, in Sweden, the envelope orange, or the orange envelope, or in France, the GP for retraite. Many Nordic countries send each year a letter to their contributors explaining which is the amount very likely being, and under alternative scenarios. That is very nice because you can always expect worse.